Hello, and welcome to another divorce discussion session. And I am really excited to have a medical doctor, on the session today. Dr. Jill Rosenthal is an award-winning Harvard and Stanford educated physician who retired after a 35 plus year career and became a certified wellness and mindset coach. Her extensive experience and training, coupled with her own transformation from a stressed, overworked, unhealthy physician, wife, and mother into a happy, healthy, thriving coach, makes her uniquely equipped to help others release unconscious thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that hold them back so they can create their dream life. What a wonderful career to be in, Dr. Jill.
I just love what I'm doing now. I had a disability retirement from my medical practice when my life caught up with me in terms of stress, taking care of aging parents from across the country, taking care of my husband who is older and has Alzheimer's, raising a young daughter, working my you-know-what off in my practice. And eventually I wound up with cancer. And the treatment ended up costing me what would have been the final 10 years of my career. But I found a new one. And I'm grateful for everything I went through because I love what I'm doing now. And I'm helping people in a different way. So it's just, what's similar for your people, if they're thinking about divorce, they're going through divorce, they're recently divorced, I want you, and I was divorced, but it was 40 years ago. Okay. So, 40? No. Almost 30 something. What I want you to know is, no matter how yucky stuff seems right now, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it doesn't need to be a train.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And you can, what you can build your life, you can make it whatever you want it to be. And there are things you can do to get there.
So first of all, being a cancer survivor, that's phenomenal. So yay, congratulations and continued good health for you. Tell me a little bit about, your story, although you're a physician and I have never worked with a client who's a physician, I don't think, but that's such a caring capacity, right? You're in. And then I heard you say you were taking care of your own parents. You were taking care of your husband who was struggling. You were taking care of a younger child. I mean, women seem to find themselves in that role of just being caretakers and givers, all over the place until they just can't take it anymore.
Oh, they can't. Right. And that's what happened to me. I was in the typical, this is typical of female physicians, but really women in general, we are trained, we are conditioned from early childhood. This is what you do. You take care of everybody else and you ignore your own needs. And what happens is that eventually the system breaks.
Yeah.
And you can't. Okay. For me, I was still taken care of. I was in a wheelchair, right? I had foot reconstruction. I was 0%, was non-weight bearing. And we were in the process of looking for assisted living facilities for my husband. And we're touring around the assisted living facilities, and I'm taking care of him. My daughter was 16 at the time. I'm taking care of everybody.
Yeah.
And, but the thing is that then I got my cancer diagnosis. They called me. I was in a waiting room waiting to do a tour in an assisted living facility in the phone, with my pathology report. And, when cancer knocks at your door,
yeah,
you got to take a time out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's cancer. So at that point, I didn't have a choice. Something had to stop. Something had to change. I had to I had to stop and take care of myself first a little bit. And I had not done that before. I didn't know how to do that even. It was hard. And as a result, I didn't get the amount of support that, I would wish for somebody else. But I did get some, and I learned how to do it. And I learned a lot. And, it doesn't matter whether it's cancer or divorce or whatever, and by the way, divorce, there's a lot of divorce among physicians.
Yeah.
Right. And I hear from physicians who are struggling with their relationships. And sometimes it's that they're upset about the relationship, and like it might be on a Facebook in a group or something, and I'll be like, oh, this is fixable.
Yeah.
If they want to fix it, and they don't see it, right? And other times it's like you're like, oh man, red flag, red flag, danger, warning, Will Robinson. Yeah. And they're like, I'm thinking about, and so it's kind of funny because we all have blinders, we all have blind spots.
We do. Yeah. Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if you wound up with some doctors.
Well, and I shouldn't say I haven't had doctors. I've had doctors' wives, because I haven't worked with any female physician. I only work with women. So I haven't, but I've dealt with a lot of doctors' wives. And I know their side of their version of the side of the relationship. Yeah.
I'm sure that it's hard to be married to a doctor.
Yeah.
Okay. Because doctors are busy.
Yeah.
They are not always as in control of their time as they would like to be, although I help them with that. It's hard sometimes for, like my first husband, for example, as opposed to my second husband. But my first husband did not understand that the marriage could be more important to me, but that sometimes a work emergency had to take priority. He took that to mean that means work is more important.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And obviously that kind of thought is going to lead to some stuff, right?
Sure.
So, but I'm sure it's hard to be married to a physician. And the other thing is physicians, we got to control everything, right? You can't make a mistake at work, right? You have to control all the variables. So what is a good, something that's good at work, if you take that home and you do that to your family, doesn't fly as well.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure that it's difficult, but the fact is that both the doctors and their divorcing spouses, or if they're maybe trying to make it work, everybody, the bottom line is they're all suffering. And they don't need to be.
Yeah. And I think, doctors are I know that you work a lot with the medical field because that's your area of expertise, but I see the same sort of issues in where one partner is a police officer, where one partner is an attorney, where one partner is a therapist, where one partner is, anybody that's in a high achieving position or that is very goal or task oriented. I think is if they're not partnered with somebody that understands that personality and that drive and that requirement for their job, it can cause a lot of friction.
It can. But the thing is, we are all capable of learning and change, and we're all capable of, but the thing is, in order to make the external change, you have to make the internal change. And just understanding with your brain, I'm sure that even my first husband, he might have understood with his brain that if I had to stay late to call a patient and tell them they had melanoma, which is a potentially deadly form of skin cancer, he might have understood rationally that I had to do that. But if he didn't feel it inside, it was still going to be a barrier. And so it's actually those inner things that I work on with people in my coaching practice. But there are so many things that people can do to fill up their wells. I mean, I remember and I'm sure you deal with this all the time. When I was in the process of splitting up from my first husband, I remember going and spending the weekend with some old friends who had known me since college. So they knew me before, right? And so, like, I realized when I went to see them and connect with them again, like, it allowed me to be who I really was, rather than to be this person who had been sort of like beaten down a little bit by, all of the stuff that happens when you might be married to the wrong person, who might
Yeah.
be a very nice person, but might not be your person. And so I think, for people to realize that, like, they got to figure out who they are and not take on the persona that the rest of the world, either their partner or anybody else, might be imagining for them. They have to kind of keep who they are in mind.
So, Dr. Jill, let's talk a little bit. Let's make a little pivot. You had already kind of started to make the corner on this one. What is it specifically that triggers people to come and say, "I need to work with Dr. Jill. I realize I've got a problem." Like, what is it that? What are the symptoms, or what are the signs that are the pain points that they're feeling that they go, "I need your help"?
It could be something either in their personal life or their work life. It could be that they just realize they're stuck, and they're not. Sometimes it's actually a physician who is feeling like, I can't do this anymore. This is killing me. I'm thinking about changing my job. I'm thinking about cutting back, which means less money. I'm thinking about leaving medicine. Sometimes they're thinking about leaving a relationship. Sometimes people, I started out originally helping people with emotional eating, and from there it kind of morphed into helping them with emotions. But, it's that they realize that they either want something or something needs to go, and they're not making it happen. And or they're having trouble making decisions.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
having they're like, do I stay or do I go at job or in a marriage?
yeah.
Do I, and sometimes I just, I do a lot of free calls for other women physicians with cancer. I witness their decision making. Do I want to do this? Do I want to do that for treatment, or anything like that? I help them deal with their fears. So, like, for somebody who is in the midst of a divorce, which is a really topsy-turvy time and is very distressing for you, whether you are the person who initiated it or the person who had it thrust upon you, either way, it's challenging. And
Yes.
if there are children involved and there's money involved, and I mean, it's really challenging. And if there's infidelity involved, then that really, I think, strikes at the core. Like, that really hits people. Like, if your spouse cheats on you, then you're like, that hits you, I think, in a way that few other things can.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that every marriage for which that happens has to end. Some of those are fixable, as you know, and some of them are not. And
Yeah.
figuring out
And that's
which,
really a personal call, because for some people it's an absolute deal breaker. Don't care what the reason was, don't care what was going on. If you do it, that's it. And other people, and I admire them, that's not me, but a lot of people
yeah,
are able to say, we can work through this, and they do, and they go on to have happy relationships. So
right. And regardless, though, it hits people in a
yeah,
way. They're
yeah,
very core of who they are. Like, how could somebody do that to
yeah,
me?
yeah,
And and the feelings that come up for people who are getting divorced, or thinking about it. Like, there's just so much about like what's wrong with me?
yeah, yeah,
Like, or what's wrong with me even that I married this person, or how am I gonna how am I going to recover? Am I going to be okay financially? How am I going to find another person when I'm ready? And the fact is, that's important, because if you don't fix what happened in your first relationship, at least in for you, and the fact is that it's always, it takes two people to be married, it takes two people to be divorced. There's always, we don't like to admit that, but there's always like some part of it that we need to accept and deal with. And whatever pattern that happened to us in our first marriage, if we don't fix that, there's a high risk that it's going to happen again. And that's what the statistics tell you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So cleaning up, like cleaning up what's happening inside you so that you can go out and be who you really are, and not carrying, like, you got to put down those suitcases that you're carrying around of all those emotions and all your past trauma and all of your old reaction patterns that you learned when you were 3 years old. Like, you have to be able to put that down.
Yeah.
In order to move on and be happy, either as a single person or in another relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what I do with people.
And so that is so powerful, because, there's that old saying, no matter where you go, there you are. Like, if you are stuck, you may not even realize you're stuck. You just can't see that there's any possibilities, because all you can see is, this is what I got to slog through. And so I always say to people, if you are getting up in the morning and you're not going, hell yeah, I can't wait to get going and doing what I want to do. Maybe not every morning, but most mornings, you're probably stuck. There's some kind of something not right there for you.
I like to think of it this way. You can't read the label from inside the can.
Yeah. Great.
And people don't always, part of your blind spot is that you don't know you have a blind spot.
Yeah.
Right. That's that's part of it. And that, by the way, is part of what makes somebody a good coaching client, right? Somebody who's willing to be like, oh, right. Somebody who's willing to like challenge like their thoughts and be willing to just play with you and be willing to like just sort of see what's out there and what's, more importantly, what's in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's really, and I love that you can't read the label from inside the can. But something interesting, sometimes your friends are trying to tell you what's on the label and you just don't want to listen to them. And, or sometimes friends feel uncomfortable saying that. You've probably come across that Johari window thing. Do you know about that? Where there's one quadrant where things that you know and people around you know, and then there's things that you know but you hide from people, and then there's things that people outside know that you don't realize they know, and then there's things about yourself that you don't know and they don't know because you've never been in that experience before. Have you ever seen that?
No, but I'm definitely going to have to look that up.
Yeah, it's Johari, Johari, and it's the two guys that develop it. But it's kind of cool because it's like, and that part. That part that you don't know and they don't know, that's like the mom that runs over and lifts the car off her baby. Nobody knew that she could do that. She didn't know she could do this, but she did it, right? So, it's so interesting how we have that perception blindness for ourselves.
Yeah, and the other thing though is that like having, like, if you're going through something like divorce, having support of friends and family or support groups or things like that is super helpful. But it also, like, everybody comes in with their own filter.
Sure.
Right. And so, like, if you talk to your best friend about stuff in your relationship, then they're viewing it through all of their life relationships, not like, it's not focused on you the same way that talking to a therapist or a coach or like somebody who's trained to be there, like, specifically for you. And I think the way they all complement each other is really helpful. But I just, I want to acknowledge for people that relationships can be challenging, but connection is where it is, and making your relationships, whether you're staying in a relationship or leaving, like you're still going to have a relationship with that person.
Right, right.
Especially if you have kids together. And so optimizing that is really a good idea. And the way you do that is optimizing yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect summary for the session, is that whole idea of you got to be good for yourself before you can be good to other people. So, Dr. Jill, if people want to find out more about what you do, or they want to reach out and connect with you and maybe talk to you about being a coach or being a coachee or whatever you want to call it, a client, what's the best way to do that?
They can find me on my website, designerlifedoctor.com, or the same way to get to it is drjillrosenthal.com. And I will also send you a link to a resource called Getting Unstuck, which perhaps they would.
Oh, thank you. I will make sure that gets in the show notes. Thank you so much for that generous gift. Yeah, I encourage people, grab this, take a look at it, and do reach out to Dr. Jill. Dr. Jill, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Great fun. Thank you for having me. And thank you. I just want to thank you for helping shepherd people through what is a really tough time in their life.
Oh, thank you so much for your kind words. And again, make sure you check in the notes and definitely reach out and grab Dr. Jill's free gift to help you get unstuck.